My family tried to steal my inheritance right from under my nose, thinking I was too stupid to notice. What they didn't know was that I'd been recording every conversation for months, and when I finally played those recordings at my grandmother's funeral, the silence in that room was deafening. Some truths are so ugly they shatter everything you thought you knew about the people you love. Before you hear how it all fell apart, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you're going to want to follow this channel after hearing what happened to me. I'm Sarah, 32 years old, and I've been taking care of my grandmother Margaret for the past 7 years. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. While my siblings were busy climbing corporate ladders and posting perfect family photos on social media, I was the one driving Grandma to her doctor appointments, grocery shopping with her every Tuesday, and sitting with her during those long, lonely evenings when arthritis made it hard for her to sleep. My older brother Michael, 35, is a real estate mogul in downtown Chicago. Designer suits, expensive watch, the whole package. He's the kind of guy who measures success by the square footage of his penthouse and the horsepower of his Mercedes. My younger sister Jessica, 28, works in marketing for some trendy startup. She's all about personal branding and networking events, always talking about synergy and disruption like she's speaking a foreign language that makes her sound important. Growing up, I was the middle child who never quite fit the mold. Michael was the ambitious one, Jessica was the creative one, and I was just Sarah. The one who remembered birthdays, who actually listened when people talked, who noticed when someone needed help. My parents always said I was too sensitive, too emotional, like those were character flaws instead of qualities that made me human. After college, I became a social worker. Not glamorous, not particularly well paid, but meaningful. I worked with families in crisis, helped kids navigate the system, fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves. My siblings never understood why I chose such a depressing career when I could have done something that actually made money. They'd joke about my bleeding heart at family gatherings, always with that condescending smile that made it clear they thought I was wasting my potential. But Grandma Margaret understood. She'd been a nurse for 40 years, back when it was more calling than career. She knew what it meant to choose service over salary, compassion over comfort. When her health started declining, there was never a question about who would step up. Michael was too busy with his empire, Jessica was too focused on her trajectory, and my parents, well, they were just waiting for someone else to handle it. So I moved back home. Not into my childhood bedroom, but into the small apartment above Grandma's garage. It was supposed to be temporary, just until we could figure out better arrangements. That was 7 years ago. Those years weren't easy. Grandma's mind started slipping slowly, like a photograph fading in sunlight. Some days she was sharp as ever, telling stories about her childhood during the Depression, sharing wisdom about life and love that you can't learn from books. Other days, she'd forget where she was, call me by my mother's name, or ask about people who'd been gone for decades. I watched her world shrink gradually. First, she stopped driving. Then she stopped going to church. Eventually, she stopped leaving the house at all unless it was absolutely necessary. But through it all, she maintained this dignity, this grace that made me understand where my mother got her strength, even if she rarely chose to use it. The house itself was a monument to a different era. Built in 1954, it sat on 2 acres of prime real estate just outside the city limits. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, hardwood floors throughout, and a kitchen that hadn't been updated since the 70s but somehow still felt warm and inviting. The property had appreciated considerably over the years. What my grandfather bought for $8,000 was now worth close to $400,000, maybe more. But it wasn't the money that made the house special. It was the memories embedded in every room. The kitchen table where 4 generations had shared meals. The living room where we'd gathered every Christmas morning. The back porch where Grandma taught me to snap green beans and shuck corn. The garden where she'd shown me the difference between weeds and wildflowers, a lesson that turned out to be about more than just plants. My siblings visited, of course. Michael would stop by maybe once a month, usually on his way to or from some business meeting. He'd spend 20 minutes making small talk with Grandma, then pull me aside to ask about her situation. Was she eating well? Did she need anything? How were her finances? Always practical questions, never emotional ones. He'd slip me $100 bill sometimes, like that absolved him of any deeper responsibility. Jessica came by more often but stayed less long. She'd bring flowers or magazines, take selfies with Grandma for her Instagram, then get antsy after an hour or two. She'd start checking her phone, talking about meetings she had to get to, people she was supposed to meet. Her visits felt performative, like she was checking off a box on her good granddaughter checklist. Neither of them seemed to notice the small changes that worried me constantly. How Grandma had started forgetting to take her medications. How she'd put salt in her coffee or wear the same dress 3 days in a row. How she'd sometimes stand in the middle of the kitchen looking lost, like she couldn't remember what she'd come there to do. I started keeping a journal of these incidents, partly for her doctor but mostly because I needed to process what was happening. Watching someone you love disappear piece by piece is its own kind of grief, the kind that doesn't have a clear beginning or end, just a slow, steady ache that becomes part of your daily routine. The conversations about Grandma's future started about 2 years ago. Michael brought it up first, suggesting we should start looking into care facilities. He had brochures from places with names like Sunset Manor and Golden Years Residence, glossy pamphlets full of smiling elderly people engaged in arts and crafts activities. The monthly costs were staggering, but he assured me that Grandma's savings could cover it, at least for a while. Jessica agreed, but for different reasons. She was worried about the liability of having an elderly person living alone, even with me nearby. What if she fell? What if there was a fire? What if she wandered off and got lost? These were valid concerns, but the way she presented them felt more like she was protecting herself than protecting Grandma. I fought them on this. Hard. Grandma had made it clear, back when her mind was sharp, that she wanted to stay in her own house as long as possible. She'd seen too many friends waste away in nursing homes, losing their independence and dignity along with their health. She'd made me promise to keep her home, and I intended to honor that promise. But my siblings had their own plans, and I was starting to realize that those plans didn't necessarily include asking Grandma what she wanted. The first hint of what was coming happened 6 months ago. I was at Grandma's house, helping her organize her medications, when Michael showed up unexpectedly. He wasn't alone. There was a woman with him, professionally dressed, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the kind of smile that never quite reaches the eyes. "Sarah, this is Linda Morrison," Michael said, like this was a casual introduction. "She's a geriatric care manager. I thought it might be helpful for her to meet Grandma, just to assess the situation." I knew immediately what this was. An ambush. They'd set up this meeting without telling me, probably hoping to catch me off guard and steamroll any objections I might have. Linda Morrison started asking Grandma questions about her daily routine, her health, her ability to manage her own affairs. Grandma, bless her heart, answered politely but looked confused about why a stranger was in her living room asking such personal questions. "I'm sorry," I interrupted, "but who exactly requested this assessment?" Linda looked uncomfortable for the first time since she'd walked in. "Well, your brother contacted our office. He expressed some concerns about Mrs. Margaret's ability to live independently." "Concerns?" I looked at Michael, feeling my blood pressure rising. "What kind of concerns?" "Sarah, don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said, using that condescending tone I'd heard my whole life. "We all know the situation isn't sustainable. Grandma needs professional care, and you need to get on with your own life." That's when I realized this wasn't about Grandma's well-being at all. This was about my siblings wanting to clear the deck, to move Grandma into institutional care so they could deal with her house and her assets without the complications of her actual presence. They wanted to warehouse her somewhere clean and convenient while they figured out how to liquidate her estate. I asked Linda Morrison to leave. Not rudely, but firmly. This was Grandma's house, and she hadn't consented to this evaluation. After she left, I had the first real fight I'd ever had with my brother. He accused me of being selfish, of keeping Grandma in an unsafe situation just so I could continue living rent-free in her garage apartment. I accused him of trying to put her away so he could get his hands on her property. This isn't about money, he said, but his eyes didn't meet mine when he said it. Then why does it feel like you're already planning her funeral? He left without answering, but something had shifted between us. A line had been crossed, and we both knew it. Jessica called me later that night, trying to play peacemaker. She understood my attachment to Grandma, she said, but maybe Michael had a point. Maybe it was time to start thinking about practical solutions. She mentioned a place called Riverside Gardens that specialized in memory care, said they had a waiting list but Michael might be able to pull some strings. It's not about putting her away, Jessica insisted. It's about making sure she gets the care she needs. She's getting the care she needs, I said. From me. But for how long? Sarah, you can't sacrifice your entire life for this. That word, sacrifice, stuck with me. Is that what my family thought I was doing? Sacrificing my life? I looked around my small apartment, at the photos of Grandma and me at her kitchen table, at the books I'd been reading to her, at the calendar where I'd marked all her doctor appointments and physical therapy sessions. This didn't feel like sacrifice. This felt like love. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe love looked like sacrifice to people who'd never learned the difference. Over the next few months, the pressure intensified. Michael started showing up more often, always with new information about care facilities or statistics about elderly people living alone. Jessica began making comments about how I was too involved and needed to establish boundaries. Even my parents, who'd been largely absent from the conversation, started suggesting that maybe it was time to consider other options. The breaking point came 3 months ago. I was at the grocery store, shopping for Grandma's weekly supplies, when I got a call from her house. She was crying, which was unusual. Grandma rarely cried, even when she was in pain. Sarah, honey, there are people here, she said, her voice shaking. They're asking me questions about my house, about my money. I don't understand what's happening. I dropped everything and drove home as fast as I could. When I got there, I found 2 men in suits standing in Grandma's living room with clipboards and cameras. Michael was there too, looking uncomfortable but determined. One of the men introduced himself as a property appraiser. The other was some kind of estate planner. What is this? I demanded. It's due diligence, Michael said. We need to understand Grandma's assets so we can plan for her care. Her care? Or your inheritance? The words came out harsher than I intended, but I was beyond caring about politeness. These strangers were in my grandmother's house, photographing her belongings, discussing her property like she wasn't sitting right there in her favorite chair, looking frightened and confused. I think you should leave, I told the men. All of you. Sarah, be reasonable, Michael said. This is going to happen whether you cooperate or not. Grandma's not capable of making these decisions anymore. According to who? According to reality. Look at her, Sarah. Really look at her. She's not the same person she was 5 years ago. I looked at Grandma, and for a moment, I saw what he saw. The confusion in her eyes, the way she was clutching the arms of her chair like she was afraid of falling, the slight tremor in her hands that had gotten worse over the past few months. But I also saw something he didn't. I saw the woman who'd raised 3 children largely on her own after my grandfather died young. I saw the nurse who'd worked double shifts to pay for my mother's college education. I saw the person who'd taught me that dignity wasn't something you earned or lost based on your circumstances. Get out, I said quietly. All of you. Now. After they left, I sat with Grandma until she calmed down. She kept asking me what those men wanted, why they were taking pictures, whether she was in some kind of trouble. I assured her that everything was fine, that I wouldn't let anyone hurt her or take her house away from her. But that night, alone in my apartment, I realized I might not be able to keep that promise. If my siblings were serious about having Grandma declared incompetent, if they were planning to seek guardianship or conservatorship, I might not have any legal standing to stop them. I was just the granddaughter who'd been taking care of her. They were the ones with money and lawyers and property appraisers. That's when I started recording conversations. I know how that sounds. I know it seems manipulative, even dishonest. But I was desperate, and desperate people do things they never thought they'd do. I bought a small digital recorder, the kind journalists use, and I started carrying it with me whenever I knew I'd be around my family. The first recording was accidental. I'd forgotten to turn it off after a meeting with Grandma's physical therapist, and it caught the conversation I had with Jessica afterward. She was talking about how much the house might be worth if it were sold, how the property could be developed, how the proceeds could be invested to provide better care for Grandma. The thing is, she said, we can't wait too long. Property values are only going up, but Grandma's care costs are going up too. We need to act while there's still equity to work with. Equity. Like Grandma's life was a business transaction. I started recording everything. Phone calls, visits, family dinners. I told myself I was protecting Grandma, documenting the truth in case I needed to defend her wishes later. But as the weeks went by, I began to hear things that made my blood run cold. Michael talking to someone on the phone about liquidating assets and minimizing tax implications. Jessica discussing with her husband how much money they could expect from Grandma's estate and how they might use it to buy a bigger house. My parents wondering aloud whether they should start looking at retirement communities for themselves, since they'd be coming into some money soon. The most damning recording came 6 weeks ago. Michael and Jessica were at Grandma's house, supposedly visiting, but I could hear them in the kitchen while Grandma was napping. They were talking about the will. She changed it about 10 years ago, Michael was saying. Left everything to be split 3 ways between us kids. But there's a problem. What kind of problem? Sarah's been living here for 7 years. If she can claim some kind of caretaker status, she might be able to contest the will. Or worse, she might be able to claim the house under adverse possession laws. Can she do that? Maybe. That's why we need to move fast. Get Grandma into care, get Sarah out of the apartment, and handle the estate before anyone can complicate things. What about Grandma? I mean, what does she want? What she wants isn't the issue anymore. She's not competent to make these decisions. We have to make them for her. I was listening to this conversation through my bedroom window, which was directly above the kitchen. I'd been recording their visits for weeks, but this was the first time they'd spoken so openly about their plans. They weren't just trying to put Grandma in a nursing home. They were trying to eliminate any claim I might have to her property, any standing I might have to speak for her wishes. But there was something else in that conversation that made my heart sink. Jessica mentioned that they'd already spoken to a lawyer about having Grandma declared incompetent. They'd been planning this for months, building a case, gathering evidence. The property appraisal, the geriatric care assessment, even some of their visits had been part of a deliberate strategy. The lawyer says we need documentation, Michael was saying. Evidence that she's not capable of living independently. Medical records, incident reports, testimony from people who've observed her decline. What kind of incidents? Falls, confusion, inability to manage her medications. Sarah's been handling all of that, but the lawyer thinks we can use it as evidence that Grandma needs professional care. They were going to use my care for Grandma against her. Every time I'd helped her with her medications, every time I'd caught her when she stumbled, every time I'd gently redirected her when she got confused, they were going to present it as proof that she was incompetent. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected. I'd known my siblings were self-centered, but I'd never imagined they were capable of this level of calculation. They'd been watching me care for Grandma for years, letting me handle all the difficult, time-consuming, emotionally draining work, while they planned to swoop in at the end and claim the benefits. 2 weeks ago, things escalated. Michael called me and said he'd been in touch with a facility that had an opening. Riverside Gardens, the same place Jessica had mentioned months earlier. They could take Grandma next month, he said, and her insurance would cover most of the costs, at least initially. It's time, Sarah, he said. This has gone on long enough. Has what gone on long enough? This situation. You living in her apartment, Grandma declining, all of us pretending everything's fine when it's not. Everything is fine. She's happy, she's safe, she's in her own home. She's not safe. What happens when she falls and you're not there? What happens when she forgets to turn off the stove? What happens when she wanders outside at night and gets lost? These were the same arguments he'd been making for months, but now they felt different. More urgent. More final. Michael, she doesn't want to leave her house. She's not capable of making that decision anymore. According to who? According to Dr. Peterson. I spoke with him last week. That stopped me cold. Dr. Peterson was Grandma's primary care physician. I'd been taking her to see him for years, and while he'd expressed concerns about her memory and mobility, he'd never suggested she needed institutional care. You spoke with him? About what? About Grandma's condition. About her ability to live independently. You had no right to do that. I had every right. I'm her grandson, and I'm concerned about her welfare. You're concerned about her house. This isn't about the house, Sarah. Then why does every conversation we have eventually come back to property values and estate planning? He hung up without answering. I called Dr. Peterson's office the next day. His nurse, Mrs. Chin, whom I'd known for years, was reluctant to discuss what Michael had said. Patient confidentiality, she explained. But she did confirm that Michael had called, asking about Grandma's mental state and whether she was capable of making decisions about her own care. What did Dr. Peterson tell him? I asked. I can't share the details of that conversation, but I can tell you that your grandmother's medical decisions are still her own to make. Unless she's been declared incompetent by a court, she has the right to choose where and how she lives. That night, I sat with Grandma and asked her, as gently as I could, what she wanted. Not what was practical, not what was safe, not what was best for everyone else. What did she want? She looked at me with eyes that were clearer than they'd been in weeks. I want to stay in my house, honey. I want to die in my own bed, in my own room, surrounded by my own things. I know that's not easy for you, but it's what I want. It's not about easy, Grandma. It's about what's right. What's right is keeping me out of one of those places where they warehouse old people until they die. I've seen too many friends disappear into those facilities. They go in walking and talking, and 6 months later they're sitting in wheelchairs staring at walls. Michael and Jessica think you'd be safer there. Michael and Jessica think a lot of things. But they're not the ones who have to live with the consequences. That conversation clarified everything for me. This wasn't about what was best for Grandma. This was about what was convenient for my siblings. They wanted to feel good about themselves, to tell their friends they'd found a nice place for Grandma, while simultaneously gaining control of her assets. I decided to make my stand. The next family meeting was scheduled for last Sunday. Michael had called it, saying we needed to make final decisions about Grandma's care. I knew this was going to be their last push, their attempt to get me to agree to their plan so they could move forward without legal complications. I spent the week preparing. I organized all my recordings, made copies, and put together a timeline of conversations and events. I also did something I'd never done before. I contacted a lawyer myself. An elder law attorney named David Brennan who specialized in protecting the rights of elderly people and their caregivers. He listened to some of my recordings and reviewed the documentation of care I'd been keeping. His assessment was sobering. While my siblings couldn't simply take Grandma's house or force her into care against her will, they could make things very difficult if they pursued guardianship. The fact that they'd been building a case for months, complete with medical consultations and professional assessments, meant they were serious about this. The good news, he said, is that your grandmother seems to have made her wishes clear, and you have evidence of that. The bad news is that family disputes over elder care can get very ugly, very quickly. How ugly? Ugly enough that families never speak to each other again. Ugly enough that the legal fees eat up most of the estate. Ugly enough that everyone loses except the lawyers. I went into that Sunday meeting knowing it might be the last time I sat at a table with my siblings as family. I also went in knowing that I had weapons they didn't know about. The meeting started predictably. Michael had prepared a presentation, complete with charts and brochures, about why Grandma needed professional care. Jessica had researched the costs and logistics of moving her to Riverside Gardens. My parents nodded along, asking practical questions about timing and finances. I let them talk. I let them present their case, their statistics, their arguments about safety and liability and quality of life. I waited until they were finished, until they'd laid out their entire plan, before I said anything. I've been thinking about what you've all said, I began, and I understand your concerns. But I have some concerns of my own. What kind of concerns? Michael asked. Concerns about whether this is really about Grandma's well-being, or whether it's about something else entirely. What's that supposed to mean? I pulled out my phone and connected it to the small speaker I'd brought with me. It means I've been listening to you. All of you. For months. I played the recording of Michael and Jessica in the kitchen, discussing liquidating assets and minimizing tax implications. I played Michael's conversation with the property appraiser. I played Jessica talking to her husband about using inheritance money to buy a bigger house. The silence in that room was deafening. You've been recording us? Jessica finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been documenting the truth. The truth about what this is really about. Sarah, you can't just, Michael started. I can't just what? Protect my grandmother from people who see her as a bank account with a pulse? I can't just document the fact that you've been planning to warehouse her so you can get your hands on her property? It's not like that, my mother said, but she wouldn't look at me. It's exactly like that. You want to know what Grandma wants? She wants to stay in her house. She wants to die in her own bed. She wants to maintain her dignity and her independence for as long as possible. But none of you have bothered to ask her what she wants because you've already decided what's best for her. What's best for her is professional care, Michael said, but his voice lacked conviction. What's best for her is family who love her more than they love her assets. I played one more recording. This one was from just 3 days earlier, a phone conversation between Michael and Jessica where they discussed how much money they expected to inherit and how they planned to split the proceeds from selling the house. When that recording ended, my father spoke for the first time. Sarah, even if we've been thinking about practical matters, that doesn't mean we don't care about your grandmother. Doesn't it? When was the last time any of you spent more than an hour with her? When was the last time you asked her about her day or her pain or her dreams? When was the last time you treated her like a person instead of a problem to be solved? Nobody answered. I stood up and gathered my things. I'm going to continue taking care of Grandma. I'm going to continue advocating for her wishes. And if any of you try to force her into institutional care against her will, I'm going to fight you with everything I have. Sarah, don't do this, Jessica said, tears in her eyes. Don't tear the family apart over this. I'm not tearing the family apart. You already did that when you decided her house was more important than her happiness. I left them sitting there at the table, probably already figuring out how to minimize the damage from those recordings. But I didn't care. I'd drawn my line in the sand. That was 5 days ago. Since then, I've heard from my siblings exactly once. Michael sent me a text saying they were taking a step back from the situation to reassess their approach. Jessica left a voicemail saying she was sorry I felt hurt by their conversations and that she hoped we could work things out. My parents haven't contacted me at all. Meanwhile, Grandma seems happier than she's been in months. Maybe she senses that the pressure is off, that the vultures have been circled back for now. We've been working in her garden together, preparing it for spring planting. She's been telling me stories about her childhood, about my grandfather, about raising my mother and my uncle. Yesterday, she looked at me while we were repotting some of her houseplants and said, "You know, honey, I've been thinking about my will." "What about it?" "I think I want to make some changes. Make sure the house goes to someone who actually wants to live in it, not someone who just wants to sell it." I didn't say anything, but I felt something shift inside me. Not satisfaction exactly, but a kind of quiet justice. My siblings had been so focused on getting their hands on Grandma's assets that they'd forgotten the most important thing: she was still alive, still capable of making decisions about her own property. "You don't have to do that because of me," I told her. "I'm not doing it because of you. I'm doing it because of them. Because I've seen their true colors, and I don't like what I see." "How do you know about?" "I know more than you think, sweetie. I know about the recordings. I know about their meetings and their plans. I know about the lawyers and the property appraisers and all the rest of it." "You heard the recordings?" "I heard enough. And I heard enough of their conversations when they thought I was napping or not paying attention. People think that because your mind isn't what it used to be, you don't understand what's going on around you. But I understand plenty." We finished repotting the plants in comfortable silence. Later, while Grandma was resting, I called David Brennan and asked him to recommend an estate planning attorney. If Grandma wanted to make changes to her will, I wanted to make sure it was done properly, legally, and in a way that couldn't be easily contested. I also called Miguel, an old friend who works in home health care, and asked him about options for additional support for Grandma. Not institutional care, but services that could help her maintain her independence safely. Physical therapy, meal preparation, medication management, companionship services. All things that could help address my siblings' concerns about her safety without requiring her to leave her home. This morning, I got a call from Jessica. She was crying. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about everything. I never wanted it to be like this." "Then why did you let it get like this?" "I don't know. I guess I got caught up in Michael's way of thinking. Everything became about money and logistics and practical solutions. I forgot that we were talking about Grandma." "You forgot that she's a person." I know, and I'm ashamed. Is there any way we can fix this?" I thought about it for a long moment. "Maybe. But it would require all of you to start over. To approach this from a place of love instead of greed. To ask Grandma what she wants instead of deciding what's best for her. I want to try. I really do. Then come over. Spend some time with her. Not to assess her condition or evaluate her assets, but just to be with her. Talk to her. Listen to her. Remember why you love her." Jessica came over that afternoon. She spent 3 hours with Grandma, just sitting and talking. They looked through old photo albums, shared memories, talked about family history. When Jessica left, she hugged me and said, "Thank you for not giving up on her. Thank you for not giving up on us." Michael hasn't called yet. I'm not sure he will. He's probably still figuring out how to save face, how to spin this situation in a way that doesn't make him look like the villain. But maybe that's okay. Maybe some relationships can't be saved, and maybe that's not always a tragedy. What I know for sure is that Grandma is where she wants to be, surrounded by the things and the memories that make her feel like herself. She's not a problem to be solved or an asset to be managed. She's a person with dignity and agency and the right to make decisions about her own life. I'm still taking care of her, still living in the apartment above her garage, still shopping for groceries and driving to doctor appointments and sitting with her during those long, quiet evenings. Some people might call that sacrifice, but I call it love. And sometimes, love means protecting people from their own family. I learned something important from all of this: family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up when showing up is hard. It's about who chooses love over convenience, dignity over profit, presence over presence. My siblings thought they were planning for the future, but they were really planning for a future without Grandma in it. They were so focused on what they could get from her death that they forgot to cherish what they could give her in life. The recordings are still there, stored safely in case I need them. But I hope I never have to use them again. I hope my family can find their way back to each other, back to the values Grandma tried to teach us about loyalty and love and taking care of each other. If they can't, well, that's their choice. But I know I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror, knowing I did everything I could to honor the woman who helped raise me, who taught me the difference between being right and being good. And when the time comes, when Grandma does pass away, I'll be able to grieve her properly. Not as a missed opportunity or a lost asset, but as a person who was loved and who knew she was loved until the very end. That's worth more than any inheritance could ever be. Sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who see you the least. But sometimes, if you're lucky, there's someone who sees you clearly and loves you anyway. For me, that someone was Grandma. For her, I hope it was me. If this story resonated with you, please share your own experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe. There are more family stories coming that might surprise you.